Hello, everyone, and welcome to the home stretch here at SCG Cincinnati, brought to you by the inimitable Rakdos, without whose hard work none of this would be possible. I'm Dom Harvey. I'm joined here in the booth by Andrew Ellenbogen, here to watch some modern and some legacy today. A rare treat getting to watch some paper legacy at a team event, which I know back in the day, these were the bread and butter for grinders like ourselves. And there's really no feeling in Magic like when you have a team that you're happy with, that you're comfortable with. All of you know your decks well, know your formats well, and you're ready to go. You get down to business.
Yeah, it's great to watch Team Magic. It's great to play Team Magic. I've long thought it was the best form of Magic, and I'm really happy to see some of the third-party tournaments kind of picking it up as of late.
Absolutely. And we're getting right back in it here. Round 13, final round of the Swiss is underway. We are on a slight delay, so the match itself is a little bit ahead of us. We're joining it in the middle of the action here. And we're going to be watching a Rakdos scam mirror here in the modern seat between Ben Weinberg on your left, Pro Tour finalist Benton Madsen here on your right. And this is maybe the best deck in modern at the moment, certainly one of the most popular in both individual modern and here in the modern seat in the team portion as well. And the Rakdos scam mirror is, well, it's strange, Andrew.
Yeah, I've played some of it myself, and I don't know. There's a lot of different ways the game can go. A lot of different things matter. Sometimes you scam them. Both players have blood moons that are kind of blank in game one, which is pretty weird. Sometimes getting ahead is bad for you because then their Fury scam becomes live, and the Fury scam is, in some ways, the end-all be-all. It's going to be pretty interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, the underlying philosophy of this scam deck is you have these individual cards and these combinations of cards which are very, very swingy and very polarized in their matchup. So, as you mentioned, main deck Blood Moon, the best card in the format against some decks, and the worst card in the format against others, including the mirror match here. So, these games will be very swingy, very back and forth, but there is still a skill edge to be gained if you can navigate the matchup carefully.
Yeah, I do think that sometimes the Scan Mirror ends up devolving this weird state where both players thought each other a bunch, and then we kind of end up playing Jund on Jund to some extent, even though both decks are not exactly playing to play that game when they shuffle up. And it kind of looked like that's what's happening here with three Thoughtseize being kind of exchanged.
Yeah, I think the level one understanding that you need for this deck is not really a classic mid range deck. It's more of this kind of weird proactive combo deck. And then the level two is, well, sometimes you can't do that, and it does get into this scrappy mid range fight, and you have to be good at playing that kind of classic Magic as well.
Agreed. I also want to say here just really quickly that Ben Weinberg is certainly no slouch either, as far as this matchup goes. A long-time grinder, long-time player with a pretty substantial list of accomplishments, I believe.
Oh, absolutely. If you remember the SCG tour days, you would often see Ben on camera because he was at the top tables doing very well. I think ninth at one of the recent American regional championships, playing Mono Green Devotion in Pioneer. Here in the modern seat for his team, it looks like Marshall Arthur's there in the background with what I'm sure will be a beautifully foiled out deck in whatever his format of choice is.
Hmm. Yeah, very much agreed. But anyway, neither player really able to set a threat in this particular game, just more resources being exchanged as we get into the mid game here.
Yeah, Orcish Bowmasters you're seeing there, one of the big pickups for this deck from the Lord of the Rings set that really has helped to elevate it in the format at large. I wouldn't say this is a Bowmasters matchup necessarily. It does line up well against a card like Seasoned Pyromancer, which has lost some ground as a result. But you're not going to be punishing your opponents in a big way with that card here. It's going to be just, well, I have a 1-1 and I have another 1-1 and we're getting to work.
Agreed, agreed. And wait, I think something really interesting just happened there. Ben Weinberg had 2 mana up at the end of Benton's turn, and I think cast nothing off it, if I'm not mistaken, which is a real sign of weakness here. There's not that many cards that can be in his hand, given that he did that.
Yeah, well, we're going to see two of those cards here. Fury taking down that one and that one and that one, cleaning Benton Madsen's entire board up, leaving Ben Weinberg when the dust settles with that Ragavan. And you see an interesting choice that comes up here in the matchup where Benton attacked with both of his 1-1s. You always are somewhat tempted to leave one of those back just in case there's a Ragavan trying to be dashed, but then you want to be applying pressure at the same time. So a real question there about how cautious you want to be.
Yeah, although Benton might have been scared of a Bowmaster from Ben Weinberg. If he like leaves back one token, then Ben Weinberg like Bowmasters it. What is he really accomplishing? Obviously, with 2 mana up, it sort of feels like Ben might have had a Bowmasters there. Although, obviously, so I sort of feel like your Prison's leaving back multiple things or no things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's a dynamic you're going to see a lot in the legacy seat, but also here in modern too. Is you always want to be the person with the second bowmaster, so you can shoot their bowmaster down, have the one that survives, and so there's some incentive to maneuver the game to a point where you bait out their bowmasters and get to respond with your own.
Yeah, definitely agreed. But in the meantime, Ben is continuing to kind of make progress, just hitting with this Ragmon over and over. Hasn't really gotten any spells off it yet, but two at a time, getting some treasures. Can't really complain about the situation. Making a potential Fury a much better top deck.
Yeah, and Ragavan always especially interesting in these mirrors where your opponent's deck is kind of the same as your deck, and you know you'll be able to cast whatever you hit off it for the most part. No colored mana mismatch there. And Ragavan, one of these very swingy cards, right? Where an uncontested Ragavan can run away with the game by itself, and then sometimes your Ragavan it's a dead draw on turn 5, or it runs into 1/3 of an Orcish Bowmasters or something and looks pretty embarrassing.
Yeah, I honestly think Ragmon has been kind of one of the big losers of the Modern Horizons, or sorry, of the Lord of the Rings set, the Retro Modern Lord of the Rings set, because the One Ring and Bowmasters both kind of don't fit that nicely into Ragmon decks and are pretty good against Ragmon, respectively. So, yeah, but obviously still four of them, maybe the best second format. Can't complain too much.
Absolutely. So you're seeing one Darthy Voidwalker there on Ben's side, reading the one in Benton's graveyard. I guess one poker for mirrors. You get to read your opponent's cards just to double check your own. And Benton going to go with having 3 mana here for putting us to the test right away here.
Is that a Fable, maybe? Is that a some sort of flip card proxy? I'm not sure.
Well, we'll bring up the deck list and enlighten ourselves on that, and then you as well. Oh, that is a Blood Moon. Okay, so but Blood Moon, not a card intended for this matchup, but you can weirdly get color screwed by your own Blood Moon sometimes if you have cards like Darthy Voidwalker or Grief, not able to fetch out second swamp. Ben has as many treasures as he needs, and now also the second swamp as well. So that Blood Moon officially dead from Benton's side. And Ben going to follow up with Seasoned Pyromancer here, refueling his own hand. We now have multiple lethal threats aboard going wide for Ben. So Ben in a commanding position, but again, would only take a top deck Fury and then a good draw step after that to swing things back Benton's way. So Ben going to be up a game here, and we'll take a look at what these players have to offer for the sideboard here. This is a matchup where you think about the scam deck against like a big mana deck, you want your Blood Moons. Against a Cascade deck, you want your Chalice of the Void, stuff like that. There's not really a card that's intended for the mirror. And even though that is a matchup you have to be able to win these days, I'm not sure what cards you would even bring with that in mind.
Yeah, so it looks like both of these players have opted for some number of Shieldreds in the board, which I assume are targeted this matchup. Certainly not only for the mirror, but among their matches that are better. Obviously, Shieldred outsizes most of the creatures in the scam mirror. If it comes down, it'll start draining your opponent, even if without attacking, which can be nice since Fury is obviously can block it profitably. So I imagine those will come in. If any Fables players come in, I also suspect will be part of it. I think the harder question will be sort of making space because beyond the obvious two Blood Moon, there aren't that many clear cuts. Uh, Maybe some of the scam elements, but I think those are pretty good in general. I don't know if you have deep thoughts on what they might side out beyond Blood Moon itself.
Yeah, so I think a lot of players will have a Leyline of the Void, which is a card that, if you have it, will come in the matchup, mainly to target those scam sequences. And if that's the case, if you know your opponent has a bunch of Leylines, there's some temptation to move away from those, Shave of Feign Death or an Undying Malice here and there. But you have so many of those, you can't really move away from those altogether. So some amount of that will be in the deck no matter what. And so that's going to lead to yet another very feast or famine kind of play pattern where your opponent has a ley line and these cards do literally nothing. Hopefully you can discard those to a Fable or a Pyromancer at some point, or you get to do the Grief Scam or the Fury Scam and get yourself far ahead.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. Although looking at these deck lists, it looks like neither of these players has chosen to bring Leyline of the Void today. So I think that we won't be seeing any of that on this particular scam mirror.
Yeah, Benton going to lead off with a Thoughtseize taking Orcish Bowmasters. Interesting choice there, maybe signifying that he has a Ragavan or something to follow up, or just that is one of the more flexible threats that you can't deal with a single removal spell.
Yeah, and Ben there I think had a grip containing Fatal Push, Grief, a couple of lands. I didn't get a great look at it, but pretty decent hand there.
And there is the Ragavan as a follow up for Benton Manson. And it's tough to know what a good hand really looks like in the mirror, right? Because both decks are so interactive that whatever you have, the first wave is almost certainly going to be dealt with. And so you almost would prefer the top of your deck to be good around turn 4, turn 5, as opposed to having something appealing in your opener.
Yeah, that's definitely agreed. This is a matchup where kind of the best card you can have is to have your kind of curve on top of your deck, right? Like have a hand of a bunch of lands, draw Ragavan on 1, a Bowmasters on 2, and a Fable on 3, or what have you. And it's interesting here that Benton didn't dash that Ragavan. I wonder what that implies about his hand. For example, does he presumably he knows about some sort of push or something, but he could still dash it to force the action on the push on his previous turn. So to some extent, him leaving up that mana implies either he has a scam element or a fatal push, and it looks like the answer is the scam element. He was trying to protect his Ragavan.
Yeah, so 3-2 Ragavan there, a little more able to brawl in combat, not going to get shot down right away by Orcish Bowmasters, although can still clean that one up pretty nicely. So I think in this matchup, you don't really wait around on the scam elements. You just find the best spot to use those profitably. So you're not going to wait around for a Grief or a Fury or something. Just buying back a Ragavan is a fine use for that card.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think 3/2 Ragavans are often pretty formidable. Also makes them a little harder to take down with a Fury, harder to kind of get got by what is maybe one of the better cards in the scam mirror. Um,
A useless Terminate flipped off Benesek for Benton Manson there. And the treasure tokens from Ragavan, this is a matchup where your deck is designed to play off a very low land count, but these games go so long that you will potentially be at risk of flooding out, and also the game will get to the stage where you're hardcasting your Grease and your Furies if you have a card like Shieldred or the One Ring I've seen as well in some of these sideboards, then you will have time to cast that, and the treasures go a long way there.
yeah, maybe even something like Croxa might come in for this matchup. I'm not 100% sure. Um, but I do see a couple of copies of that card between the two decks.
Yeah, Croxa has the virtue of what you might call good colors in the sense of it pitches to Grief and it pitches to Fury. Not both at once, but you see where I'm going with this. But then also, it is a card which, in a 7 or 8 turn game, you will get to escape that and it will trade off with a bunch of your opponent's cards. And also, it does pair weirdly with your Feign Death effect sometimes, where you Croxa, you bring it back, just make them discard 2 cards, and that could be a fine line as well.
Very much agreed. And Ben here looks like he's holding a hand of 3 kill spells and a scam element, if I'm not mistaken. So it appears that Ben kind of can't really pick this hand apart in any meaningful way, but we'll obviously just take the clean 2-for-1, nothing to complain about.
Yeah, this is what we meant, where if Benton had a good card, Ben would just take it. But instead, Benton has 3 of a medium card, loses one of those, gets to use another copy of that on the Grief, and just continue trugging along with the Ragavan.
Yeah. An interesting choice Ben has here is whether to expend the Fatal Push or the Terminate. The idea being that, well, he's not necessarily guaranteed Revolt forever on the Fatal Push, and the Fatal Push can't be pitched to a potential Fury. That is, not being red is one of the downsides of Push. So maybe he should choose to hold the Terminate, but on the other hand, it could, in theory, prevent him from double spelling, because he does only have those 4 lands, and if he, say, flips something on top of the deck, draws a spell, could end up in a spot where he doesn't have removal up because he chooses to expend the push over the Terminate. So kind of a small, interesting decision here.
Notably, Fatal Push could also not kill an opposing Fury if that was Ben's response to this. So I think you want to keep the more flexible one in terms of both what it can target and what it can pitch to.
No, that's a good point. Hitting Fury, I mean, again, I think Fury is one of the best cards in this mirror. Obviously, it does require 5 mana to cast, but once you get there, it dominates the board. 2 points your opponent, kind of does everything you want. But it looks like the Ragavan has flipped a Bowmaster here, which is a pretty big swing. Every time Ragavan draws a card, I just think it's so brutal. Partially because the scam matchup trades so many resources back and forth that the swing of gaining +1 resource is larger than it would usually be.
Exactly. And you can imagine how good a Fury would be from Ben Weinberg's side here. And this is a good rule of thumb in these Fury mirrors is a lot of the time the game will come down to who has the last Fury standing. You play a Fury and sweep my stuff up. I then play my own Fury, kill your Fury, and now have this big threat. they're flying around. The feign death effects make that a little bit more complicated in the mirror here, especially so. From Benton's side, he's stolen Ben's Orcish Bowmasters. Ben could use his own feign death effect in a spot like that to get back his Bowmaster on his own side, but just a hard cast Grief here instead. Seeing,
oh wow,
wow, okay, so Fury, feign death, and Terminate. Both of the red cards play here, and we'll let Benton continue applying pressure. I think we are pretty likely to see a game 3 here in the scam era before too long. And these games are both grindy enough, but also fast enough that it feels like kind of high-paced Magic, even though it's just the classic Jund recipe.
definitely agreed. And on one hand here, this grief does mean that Ben can now take Benton's best card, Fury, and as we've talked about, one of the best cards in the matchup overall. However, it just doesn't seem like that's going to be good enough unless he has some pretty strong follow-up, which is difficult with only one card left.
Yeah, there is a Ragavan, which, again, looks pretty embarrassing on this board state, right? Like, I don't know what fraction of a Bowmaster it gets to trade it, but it's not a high one.
Yeah, definitely true. He could try to block the opposing Ragavan, since even with the counter, those will trade, but that's still not that impressive given that he literally knows Benton has a scam element ready to recur the Ragavan again if needed.
Doughty Voidwalker there from Benton. So this is a card which can harness your opponent's own plays against them in the same way as Ragavan sometimes. You can Voidwalker follow up with a removal spell or discard spell, snipe their Fury or something, and really turn the tables that way. Can also stop them from a Fury scam can still kill the Voidwalker on the first pass, and then there's a window there to use your feign death or what have you, but can stop the Grief scam, can stop Seasoned Pyromancer coming back for more value from the graveyard later on. So the graveyard hosing effect does have some value there as well.
Yeah, agreed. And I'm kind of wondering, with the Voidwalker being added as an unblockable threat here, if Ben even has a road to recovery at this point. Like, he certainly needs a crazy turn next turn, probably exactly Fury. And then even if he finds exactly Fury, we're not done yet. He might need, like, Fury into Fury or something to win this game. I'm not exactly sure, but I'm trying to piece together his outs here. Because he's not, like, dead on board. He's just kind of very far behind.
Benton shuffling around his creatures behind his lands, which I know is a very controversial choice. Not one that I think is officially supported by the tournament rules anymore, but Benton likes to play by the beat of his own drum.
Yeah, certainly not someone afraid of controversy, as anyone who has been aware of the drama around his recent article knows. But really leading into that identity here with the lands in front.
Benton's in his zone. I am sure has chugged down a solid Ethiopian coffee this morning. Yeah, we're ready to win another tournament or get second, I suppose.
Absolutely, and with a strong record here, that certainly may be in his grasp. Oh wow!
We do see, yeah, we do see one of the interesting choices you get to make as a scam deck builder is, what do you want your 20th land to be? So some people keep it simple, just another fetch land, another basic swamp, something like that. We have a Takenuma sometimes, a Castle Locthwain, which I think is ambitious given the rest of the mana base. Ben Weiber going for the new option in a Mount Doom, which I think we see just hiding out there on the left.
Yeah, and I've actually seen this in a few scam lists, and I think it makes a fair amount of sense. Scam can often be in spots where you are able to get the opponent pretty low with a turn 1 Fury or a turn 1 Grief. Even sometimes the normal beatdown with unblockable Voidwalkers and Griefs and whatnot. And being able to finish them off with a few pings from Mount Doom, I think comes up more than you might expect.
Yeah, this deck would love to have the Rakdos Canopy land, like Horizon Canopy, Fiery Islet, something like that, but we may do with what we have here.
And it's interesting to see that Ben Weinberg has board in Turok here. Obviously, the protection from white is completely irrelevant on the Turok in this matchup, but it's still a solidly sized body. And if your opponent is holding back something, holding back removal, holding back Fury to wait for better boards, something like that, the Turok can really get you. I'm not totally sure if I would board that in or not, just because it is going to be awkward a fair amount of the time, and mostly because the opponent's Hellbent, it doesn't really do anything. But
Yeah, it's not a matchup that it's for, right? Like you want that for the 4-color decks and the control decks, and maybe where the protection from white comes up. But it's a kind of thing where you have a bunch of cards you want to take out, and then you're scrolling through your sideboard and you see it and you think, hey, this is a grindy matchup, right? What's the worst that could go? What's the worst that could happen?
yeah, I mean, I definitely not saying Ben shouldn't have boarded in. More just like it's sort of a middling card he has access to. Not one of his bangers from the sideboard, just an acceptable substitute. And I kind of wonder if seeing that might mean that Ben Weinberg has taken out Thoughtseize in some number, just because he has to make room somehow.
Yeah, this is the age-old black mid-range mirror question for Modern, right? Is it used to be the John players in the know would take out their thought seizers in the games because you would trade off resources so quickly that when you eventually drew one in the mid game, that would be a dead draw. You wanted all your draws to be live. I don't know how good that heuristic ever actually was, but I think these days when all the cards are so high impact, you accept that, yeah, I'll draw a dead Thoughtseize sometimes, but I really need to take that Fury or that Shieldred or whatever it is, and therefore that's worth the trade-off of giving myself a dead card sometimes.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I'm mostly a pro Thoughtseize player these days in these mid-range mirrors. I do think that the old Reduke cut all your Thoughtseizes approach is a bit dated. However, I just am trying to think about the implications of Ben having that card, like how he made room, what he took out, and it just seems like Thoughtseize is one place he might have shaved. Obviously, I don't know for a fact that he did or did not do that. I'm just kind of speculating as the implications.
Yeah, if you're not cutting that, then you've got to cut something else, right? And so that leads to its own questions here. So we see, okay, so Bowmaster shooting down the Grief, finishing that one off, and you see the awkward lineup of Seasoned Pyromancer against Orcish Bowmaster in the mirror, where you still get to cycle through a few cards, and it's kind of a trade still, so it's not the worst thing in the world, but still a very awkward punish for what used to be one of the most reliable cards in the matchup.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of funny how literally every card with text draw a card on it. It's basically gotten worse in Modern as a result of the absolute dominance from Bowmasters.
And it turns out that maybe the other best card in the set, or best card in the format, depending on who you ask, is a new card that draws you a lot of cards, Andrew. So Bowmaster benefiting from that as well.
Yeah, Lord of the Rings as a set has kind of had this weird self-reinforcing effect on Modern where the two best cards, that is Bowmasters and the One Ring, well, since Bowmasters is good against the One Ring, the fact that the ring is so good makes Bowmasters even better. So there's this weird dynamic where now them are better than they otherwise would be, kind of as a second order effect.
Yeah, Voidwalker getting sacrificed now. Benton is going to get Seasoned Pyromancer, safe from no Bowmaster on the other side. So you're going to see that card at its best here. And Fury as well as a follow-up from Benton. Wow. So you see what I talk about with the swings here. Benton now has a lethal board. Ben does have a Fable, so can cycle through some cards, maybe try and fight back with his own Fury here, which would put him, I think, back in the lead, barring any kind of Feign Death effect. But looks like maybe a tough choice over what and how many cards to discard.
Well, okay, I think what Ben's thinking here is he basically needs a Fury out of this. I don't really think anything else will do. And kind of the question is, okay, so given that he needs Fury, is he supposed to discard both cards, even given that it will lead to two Bowmaster triggers? Or is he supposed to hope that Fury's like exactly the top card? Does he need to be even greedier? I think is the question at hand. But it looks like he's not found the Fury, and we are off to a game 3.
Absolutely. You mentioned earlier that Lord of the Rings, it's not Modern Horizons, but it's kind of not Modern Horizons either. I think they took care to say this is not going to be Modern Horizons 3, and that's certainly true in terms of depth, right? You don't have the deep bench that Modern Horizons 1, Modern Horizons 2 had, but I would say the top 3 or 4 cards from Lord of the Rings certainly on that level and tries to move alongside the top cards from any other set that we've seen in recent memory.
Very much agreed, but it looks like we're going to go to the Legacy seat now to kind of check in on that match while we wait for a game 3 of the Modern seat.
Yes, and what a treat to come in on here. Marshall Arthurs with a beautifully blinged out Jeskai deck here, rolling dice for Comet Stellar Pup. Are you familiar with this one, Andrew?
Yeah, I am. So this is the unhinged, or sorry, whatever the most recent unset is, Planeswalker.
It is deeply unhinged, yes.
Yeah, and I know that this is one of the cards that isn't on MTGO, which is actually pretty interesting because it means that if these players are, grinding those leagues or those challenges or what have you, they might not have experience playing against the card. And I'm sort of wondering if that gives Marshall any sort of edge as compared to the other options. Certainly, it may or may not have been a factor decision, but just an interesting note.
Yeah, there is quite a long list of cards that are absent from Magic Online. I think some of them scheduled to trickle in towards the end of this year, but for now, Paper Legacy and Online Legacy can look quite different, and that list spans the entire range of archetypes. So there's no absolute game changer there, where the format's just not the same without it, but the format just does feel a little bit different, and you notice that when you play in Paper there. So Drew Kobus dredging and casting Life from the Loam here can reassemble the parts of his Dark Dex combo, get some other value there out of the bargain as well.
Yeah, I mean, Drew's kind of got to get something going here just because he's, I don't know, getting beaten down in a pretty quick fashion here. And I imagine that one of the reasons he's going for the start depths line here is, well, a 2020 flying blocker is something he kind of needs.
Yeah, and the one 2020 attacker can win the game in one swing by itself. We do see, though, a pair of flying attackers and or blockers from martial artists, and the first Sajiri step on the board there from Drew Kobus. We'll see if he has a second one that could let him swing through those if need be. But Arthur's looking to be in a good spot here in this game one. On the back of Comet Stellar Pup, which, if you haven't seen that one in action before, it's quite a treat, and you get to officially roll dice within a game of Magic, which is not a common experience.
Yeah, I mean, you do love to see Magic coming down to die rolls, kind of in all formats. But people accuse Pioneer of being too die roll dependent, but we're about to see who the real die dependent format is.
Yeah, be careful what you wish for, I suppose.
So wait, let's see how this goes. We've got a 1 there, so we'll be getting some squirrel tokens. Is that correct?
We get tokens. I'm not sure myself. Yeah, they are squirrels. Okay. We get some hasty squirrels. And then the other options are if you hit a 3, you can buy back a card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to your hand. If it's 4 or 5, then Comet deals damage equal to its loyalty counters to a creature or player. And then you adjust its loyalty. And then you also have an option to re-roll as well. If you hit a 6, well, you just go again. There's guaranteed to be something strange happening with Comet. You just don't know what it is when you sign up for it.
Yeah, it's honestly pretty interesting. Most planeswalkers, you kind of have control over them. You get to decide sort of what actions the planeswalker takes each round. But Comet actually decides what Comet does each round. You don't know what's going to happen. Comet really has a mind of its own, which is kind of ironic given that it's literally a dog, which is known for their obedience. But yeah,
Well, speak for yourself, Andrew. My dog is not known for her obedience, so if she was rendered in Planeswalker form, she'd look a lot more like that, I think.
all right, but we're going to go back to see the game 3 of the modern match now, and Ben Weinberg leading off with a turn 1 Ragavan. One of the better starts in this deck. Obviously, not quite as strong as a Grief plus Recursion, but can't complain.
Yeah, and Ragavan on the play, so much stronger than Ragavan on the draw, and no news there, right? But especially in the face of Orcish Bowmasters, could maybe get an attack in before it falls to its death. Turns out Lightning Bolt will just accelerate that process, so no swing there from the Ragavan, but maybe the coast a little bit clearer for Doughty Voidwalker or whatever the next follow-up threat is.
Yeah, I know that in some matchups, players are these days cutting Ragavan on the draw much more so than they used to because of the existence of Bowmasters. I kind of doubt the Scammer would be one of them. I suspect both players have their full complements here, but it just goes to show how big a delta that card is, play versus draw.
Yeah, Ragavan's main role in this matchup sometimes is it's a red card for Fury, or it's just a card to pitch to your Fable or your Seasoned Pyromancer. So that's one of the interesting decisions right out of the gate is, do I play my Ragavan, or do I just expect that I'm going to need some blank piece of cardboard, a rectangle, if you will, at some point in the future?
Yeah, and honestly, I think this is kind of one of the reasons why Scam as a deck works as well as it does. It's just one of the best decks, kind of in the history of Magic, at turning arbitrary cardboard into meaningful resources. Just between Fable, Pyromancer, Fury, Grief, the deck can almost always utilize a card, even if it does absolutely nothing on the current board state. And that really makes cards that are sometimes great, sometimes bad, such as Ragavan, much more appealing.
Exactly. If this isn't one of the Blood Moon matchups, well, you just pitch it to Fury, and now this is a Blood Moon matchup because it found a job to do. And it sounds like Marshall Arthurs did, in fact, take down that first game there on the legacy seat. So we'll see how game 3 concludes here in Modern between Ben Weinberg and Benton Madsen. And the Pioneer Sleeps, no slouches for these teams either. So two of the more competitive teams in the tournament are both very much live for top 8 here. Top 12, excuse me.
Yeah, and it appears that Ben Weinberg has kind of won this Bowmaster fight here. The last Bowmaster stands tall, with as a result him also having the larger kind of army token because he's played 2 Bowmasters, Ben's 1.
Yes. It does appear that some kind of authority figure has decreed that Benton will be playing with lands and back creatures and spells in front. So you'd love to see that, I suppose, if the current state of Twitch chat is anything to go by.
Yeah, I mean, I do love trolling Twitch chat, and I did appreciate that the lands in front were succeeding at that role. However, we'll accept actually following what are maybe the rules. I'm not 100% sure.
Who can say? I'm not a judge.
But yeah, so let's see. Did Bennett miss a land drop here? I'm sorry. Is this his act, or did he hit on time? I'm not 100% sure. Is this? And the reason I'm wondering this is because it affects whether kind of the composition of his hand. I think I see at least a Seasoned Pyro in there, although obviously it's a bit awkward into the Bowmasters.
A bit might be understanding it here, yeah. Especially with, we already have a 2/2 army, and that army is only getting bigger from here. Looks like we have a brief pause just to double check something at the table. So Benton playing a Swamp and playing Croxer. Okay. So that's a card which, given enough time, can do some good work in the mirror. But Ben, ahead on board, looking to press his advantage, and the Croxer now is an added incentive to do that, right? You really want to get the game over with before that card can escape from the graveyard and do even more damage.
Yeah, definitely agreed. And I also think it's kind of interesting that Benton chose to play it off a basic Swamp here, because I believe he has a Shockland in hand. So him choosing to play the Swamp there, right? He's very intentionally leaving up black, since playing a tap land would otherwise be correct. And yeah, there is the fatal push that is kind of representing. Choosing to kill the Bowmasters over the army token makes a lot of sense, especially if he has Pyro in hand, which I think that he does. Although then again, I'm going off a pretty brief glimpse of his hand.
Yeah, taking the chance there while Ben doesn't have black mana up in response to the fetch land activation, just to not get blown out by some kind of feign death style effect. Would that be a signal to you as Benton that Ben therefore can't have one of those effects in his hand?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say for sure, but I think it does suggest he does not have access to a scam element.
Yeah.
And
Maybe if Ben felt that this turn was scripted anyway, he knew he was going to be casting Fable, and would want to discard the feign death anyway or something, then maybe it would make sense. But just something that, if you're alert, you look for anywhere to gain that kind of information. So Fury getting evoked here by Benton, pitching the Seasoned Pyromancer that would be blanked by the Bowmaster that's now been killed by the Fury, and escaping Croxer. Wow, so really nice turn here from Benton, swinging things back in his favor.
yeah, very much agreed. And although Benton just has this kind of one Croxa in his list, I imagine that a major reason he's playing that card is to win this matchup. Croxa, one of the strongest mirror breakers in Pioneer Red Black mirrors, and I don't think that Scam is an exception. Although obviously the Scam mirror can kind of go a lot of different ways. Just being a card that is active through Thoughtseize in a matchup where Thoughtseize are being exchanged left and right is just invaluable.
Yeah,
Like,
and the scam mirror may be the most important matchup in this tournament. I saw Chris Gillio say that he played 7 scam mirrors over the course of this weekend, which is going to have some kind of psychological effect on you. But also, it's worth noting in case you're metagaming for a tournament like this.
yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense because Scam is both one of the best decks, maybe the best deck in Modern, and also I think not that challenging to play reasonably, if that makes sense. But there's certain decks that I feel like the kind of average person showing up to a tournament would just never pick. I just don't see people. But this deck just is not one of them. I think it's both very strong and fairly accessible, and that combination is just going to mean it's everywhere.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think you see the big difference between the novice scam players and the experienced scam players. That said, the whole philosophy of the deck is getting free wins wherever you can, and you get a lot of those free wins. Kind of, the Fury does the same thing for me that it does for you, right? So if I sweep your board, make a 4/4 Fury on turn one, then I'm probably winning that game, regardless of what my ELO is or whatever.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I'm not trying to say that there's not nuance to this deck. There certainly is, and I think most Magic players, I think, have a tendency to underrate how hard even decks that are above average easiness are. If that makes sense, Magic's an incredibly difficult game. However, I just kind of noting that when the best deck overlaps the deck that's perceived rightly or wrongly as accessible, it tends to mean it's everywhere.
Yes. And we see a handshake, multiple handshakes, hands going back and forth, disembodied hands coming across in our camera here. So maybe one of the matches, not this one, has concluded, but this one may be on the verge of concluding as well.
Yeah, it does seem like Benton's got a, or sorry, Ben has a pretty commanding lead here. Although Benton is fighting his way back, and eventually that Croxa will come back for another round, which is probably backbreaking if it ever happens.
Yeah, it looks like Ben was able to terminate the Croxa, and there's a Nile Spellbomb there that's going to forestall any second attempt there. So even after that amazing turn from Benton, I think Ben probably still in the driver's seat here. Now we see Grief post-combat, taking one of the several relatively useless Feign Death effects there.
And Fable Grief is going to lock, it has potential to lock Benton out of the game here if he doesn't get something going quickly. Since the Grief can be copied to instant speed, it means that Benton will never be able to draw any sorcery ever again. So there'll be no Fury comeback. There'll be no Pyro into something comeback. Kind of Benton's only out at that point will be to find specifically in speed removal, which there just isn't all that much of in the Scam deck.
Yeah, Ben has his own Grief here. And the Grief going to get pushed in response of the treasure, it looks like. But maybe Ben, like he knows about the Undying Malice, right? So I guess I would force his hand on the Nile Spellbomb. Maybe not even. Yeah, so just gonna let this happen instead. Yep, getting Revolt first. Good, good.
Okay, and so then, and that's gonna draw the scoop, which I think is pretty reasonable. I don't think Ben had much in the way of outs from that game state. The Grief in the draw step thing is pretty savage, and even beyond that, Ben just could also just hit for 8, put Ben down to 2, and not even a Fury can clean up that board from that point, which is pretty problematic.
Yeah, so that's a scam mirror for you in a nutshell. Would not be surprised to see more of that as we head into our elimination rounds here. For now, though, with the conclusion of that match, we're going to cut you back to the booth very quickly. And so, with that being the last round of splits, I imagine we're going to have a little bit of a pause as the top cut is announced and they get ready. And we'll bring you more Magic as soon as we have that. We are on a little bit of a delay, so hopefully we can speed that along a little bit and kind of catch up with reality, if you will. But we're gonna see if we can bring you Game 3 of Legacy. Actually, Anurag saying may be able to whistle that one up for us.
I mean, certainly, if that's possible, would love to watch that. Some more high quality Magic. But in the meantime, I'm just kind of idly observing the standings of the tournament going into this round, which there's kind of a lot of big names towards the top of the standings here. You see Patrick Wu, noted Azuri's Lotus Field aficionado, his team at a 10-2 record. You see Jerry Thompson's team, Corey Baumeister, a lot of strong names at the top of the standings here. But anyway, let's get into the action with the Legacy match, Game 3.
Yeah, so Drew Kobus leading on Thoughtseize here out of the Abzan Depth deck. Depths, the green-white Depths core has been a staple of Legacy for a while, a personal favorite of my own. You haven't seen the Black Splash too much previously, but Orcish Bowmaster is actually a big reason to embrace a bigger splash like that for the first time. And then with that, you get Sideboard Thoughtseize and also a copy of Grist as well for your Green Sun's in the toolbox. So this is a full-on Abzan Depth deck at this point, and not just, green-white with one sideboard card or something.
Yeah, and it appears that he's done a pretty good job of stripping Marshall's hand. Looks like Marshall has just 2 lands left. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the follow-up Elvish Reclaimer got Force of Will. So now Marshall on 2 lands and 2 cards, and those are 2 lands as well. Blood Moon off. Jesus. Blood Moon just
Wow.
jumping off the top of the deck there for Marshall Arthurs. Drew now unable to cast spells until Mox Diamond makes an appearance here.
Well, and I mean, not only that, even if he finds the Mox Diamond and kind of gets his deck online again, that Blood Moon will also mean he's going to be unable to Depths combo until he handles it as well. Although, there's always a chance of the weird interaction where, like, if you play a Depths into the Blood Moon, then remove the Blood Moon, you actually get a 20/20.
Yes, because the Dark Depth, when it's coming in, will not have its abilities, will not have counters, and so once the Blood Moon goes away, the Dark Depth regains its abilities, looks at itself in the mirror, realizes, hey, I have no counters, and just pops out a Marrowlage. So here is Orcish Bowmasters, which is a Clock of Swords, and Shark Typhoon going to get cycled in response to not get another a mass and damage trigger there. So 2/2 Shark from Marshall, and Bowmaster and his army there from Drew.
Yeah, and this is a pretty interesting game state. Just like, obviously, Drew is pretty hampered by the Blood Moon, but Marshall doesn't have really all that much going, and it wouldn't take that much in the way of value for Drew to kind of just play through this, defeat the Shark. Wait, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Did the Bowmasters die? What's going on here? Oh, it's forced. Is that correct?
Oh, so did Marshall
So I think
cycle
Marshall
into? Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Top of his deck being very kind to him here.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it is Force kind to him. I mean, exchanging 2 cards for Bowmaster, obviously fine, nice to unlock his cantrips and stuff. But is that an exchange he's excited to make, or just an exchange he's like willing to make in some sense, right? What he's really looking for here is some source of recursive advantage, I imagine, something like a Planeswalker, so because to kind of exploit all the time that he's bought.
Yeah, I think if that Mox Diamond hadn't showed up, Marshall would be quite happy to just make any exchange like that. Now there is some pressure to apply pressure, get the game over with, or at least cement your lead while you can before Drew draws something like a Green Sun Zenith for some card that could get him back in the game instead. Marshall top deck's Narset Powder Veils and now has his pick of 4 different spells here. Going to go with Marshall Otherworldly Light, which can be cast for X=0 and take out that Mox Diamond and really set Drew back to just not being able to participate in this game at this point.
Yeah, I mean, this is absolutely savage.
Yeah, crop rotation here, though. Sacrificing this could find a basic to at least offer some kind of counterplay under the Blood Moon again.
Yeah, it seems pretty ambitious to go for something other than a basic, just because if you do find that Dark Depths, you still have no way of casting the removal spell for the Blood Moon, which means kind of what are you even accomplishing at that point? Like, your road to comfort here seems like it has to involve a basic. And I imagine that this March in Marshall's deck was targeted substantially at Urza's Saga, as far as like why it's in his 75 to start with, but certainly not unhappy to kill a Mox Diamond here. I mean, that's a clean 2-for-1.
Yeah, Urza's Saga, one of the best cards in Legacy against this style of blue control deck, especially if you don't have your own Wastelands or cards like that. And so March, and I think Blood Moon to some extent, are both chosen with Saga in mind.
Mm. Yeah. So, okay. Now Drew has found the basic forest. He's under some pressure from this Narset, this Shark, and this Moon. What is getting out of this look like for him? Marshall's still on pretty low resources. Probably doesn't have another counter loaded up. Any thoughts on how Drew kind of gets out of this situation?
So I guess Zenith I'm thinking if Zenith for Grist would do anything, I guess Knight of the Reliquary would be pretty big at this point, and then maybe that could lead to something else. It's going to take several steps, I think, though, and it looks like Marshall just found Comet off Narset. So the Stellar Pup is back on board once again here. And we're going to be rolling some dice. Let's go.
Yeah, so I think the prevalence of Common Legacy is pretty interesting these days. And kind of something I've wondered about this card is, okay, so Comet isn't blue. This is a key factor about the card, right? You can't pitch to Force of Will, which is unpleasant, like one of the kind of outs of all the various Four-mana Planeswalkers historically that you could. However, that also means it's immune to the blue hate, such as Pyroblast, Red Blast, etc. How do you think that kind of falls on the balance?
I think there was a time where not being pyroblastable was a much bigger deal. So when Blue Red Delver was the deck and not just one of many good decks, now that trade off is a little closer, I think. But the rest of your deck is blue enough that I think that still works in your favor. It is interesting as well when you compare it to a bunch of the other more deterministic options, if you like, where you might try to opt for the safer option, especially in your control deck, where you're really trying to script the game around certain outcomes. But there's the raw power of Comet can just not really be denied, and you're going to see some of that on display here, I think. So, Drew, crop rotating for Dark Depths. So we do now have the out of, if there is a way to get that Blood Moon off the board, Marrow Rage will Spring Force from the Icy Depths, and Marshall has a blocker for that in the form of the Shark, and could maybe buy back a removal spell with Comet if you get the right roll there. So the game will not be over, but that maybe is where things begin.
And that was a 6 roll on Comet there that I think we just saw, which means that Marshall actually does get to activate 2 of Comet's abilities this turn. Or perhaps I should say at least 2. Wait, is that another 6? Do we keep going?
There it is. Okay. Handshakes all around here. It looks like the team of Marshall Arthurs and Ben Weinberg is going to move up to 10-1. So I should comfortably be in our elimination rounds, I believe. Or, okay, there's the actual handshake. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. So yeah, you'll see the team on the left there move to our elimination rounds. Tough break there for Benton Madsen, Chase Masters, and Drew Kobus, who I think had a great start to the tournament and often seen around the top tables of a team tournament near you, but not able to convert this time around, sadly.
Yeah, definitely unfortunate for them, but we will then presumably be seeing Ben Weinberg's team in the top 8 here. Great for us in the sense that, I don't know, I think we will be seeing more scam, higher potential for kind of more scam mirrors up there, which I greatly enjoy watching, although I can't speak for anyone else.
There is a lot of action, I guess is the best you can say about it. We're going to cut you back to Anurag live from the floor for a second there, so we'll be back with you before too long. Stay tuned.